This episode is brought to you by Paramount Plus. Ewan McGregor stars as Count Alexander Rostov in A Gentleman in Moscow, the new limited series based on the best-selling novel. Stream it with the Paramount Plus with Showtime plan. Visit ParamountPlus.com to try it free.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and Oregon Live, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm Jamie Hale.
And I'm Vickie Connor. Together, we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. And today, we're getting a little advice for people hoping to climb to the top of Oregon's tallest mountain.
That's right, Vickie. We are just getting into peak climbing season on Mount Hood. But for folks looking to summit Oregon's famous volcano, they should keep a few things in mind before heading up there, namely a new change to the permitting process that is in effect this year.
Here to tell us more about what climbers should know this year is Ryan Matz, the Climbing Ranger Program Manager for Mount Hood National Forest. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So Ryan, we're looking at Mount Hood here from the Willamette Valley. It looks pretty nice. It's very pretty. What are climbing conditions like up there, though?
Well, we still have essentially winter conditions on the mountain. Lots of snow. We're down at this elevation of the ski areas, or at least Timberline and Mount Hood Meadows. We have 100% or more of normal snow depth, and we have lots of snow on the mountain, and even more than that on the upper mountain. But we still have very active winter weather that means we have very quickly changing conditions from day to day or hour to hour. So it's really dynamic conditions right now. Very much still winter on the upper mountain, and waiting to see what kind of weather spring will bring us.
So for those who aren't familiar, what is kind of the climbing season for Mount Hood?
Traditionally, mid-late spring through early summer. For most people would say April through June, though that we think that's expanding, especially on the earlier end. Seeing more and more climbers in the winter, and there really can be excellent climbing conditions throughout the winter. Just is extremely important to pick the right conditions in the winter, and favorable conditions line up more often in those spring months.
And can you explain a little bit about why this time period, like what specifically about the conditions makes it good for climbing?
Yeah, so both mountain and weather hazards are the key factors to consider for anyone trying to travel on the upper mountain on Mount Hood. The weather itself is can be a significant hazard, from cold to precipitation to all kinds of crazy wind and minimal to no visibility at times. So the weather itself is a hazard, but then the weather affects all mountain conditions, from snow surface conditions to whether rockfall and icefall are more or less likely. Those typically are more likely when it's warmer, and a frequent hazard on Mount Hood is avalanches. So all those put together in combination with glacial features that change throughout the year, and fumarole melt holes that open and close, mean that conditions change frequently throughout the whole year. But in the spring, we tend to get more stable weather, more consistent days of relatively warmer days and cold nights, and that's really what lines up for the best climbing conditions on Mount Hood. Is consistent days of mild daytime temperatures and good refreeze overnight. We don't like really warm weather, and really cold wintry weather is a challenge in itself. So we want to see a good refreeze every night and a long stretch of that daily melt freeze cycle to allow good climbing conditions in the early morning hours.
That's some good advice, good evergreen advice. I feel like this is the kind of stuff people want to know about year after year. Everyone kind of looks for that little pocket of good weather to get up there and climb Mount Hood. But of course, this year there are some differences, not weather related, for folks who want to climb, namely these new climbing permits. So whenever people, I feel like, hear new permits, they kind of freak out a little bit. So, but what can you tell us about these new permits that are now in effect?
Our new climbing permit started January 1st of this year, 2024. Those climbing permits are required to travel above 9,500 feet anywhere on Mount Hood year-round. There's a 3-day permit option at a cost of $20 and an annual permit option at a cost of $50. We encourage climbers to wait as long as possible to buy those. It takes less than 5 minutes to purchase online on recreation.gov. You can also find the link on our Forest Service website to purchase those permits. So for either an annual permit or a 3-day permit, no need to purchase in advance, and there's no limit on number of permits sold. So we want people to buy the permit in such a way that gives them maximum flexibility for when they climb, to allow climbers to choose good, favorable conditions so they can have a good time and come home safe.
So this is not like the enchantments, right?
Not at all.
People are like in a lottery and you've got to go at the, log on your computer at 6 a.m. This seems like it's not like a restrictive use permit, but rather, I guess, what then is sort of the point of the permits then?
Yeah, it's not a capacity limitation, as we call that. It's simply a special recreation permit that is a fee for a special type of recreation. In this case, traveling on the upper mountain of Mount Hood. So that fee is used to pay for services for those climbers, primarily at an improved and expanded climbing ranger program versus what we've had in past years. So we're trying to improve and expand our climber safety services, and also help take care of the alpine upper elevation landscape of Mount Hood. So yeah, hope that's the idea, is kind of get on board with how other really high use peaks are managed, like Mount Shasta is kind of our key example of what we're trying to become as a climbing ranger program, and use those funds directly to benefit the people recreating up high on Mount Hood.
So Ryan, looking back to last year, roughly how many people climbed Mount Hood?
That's a good question. We don't have the most accurate numbers, because we base our use numbers on wilderness permits, which are required, but many people don't complete them. But most are kind of our average over the last 10 years or so is we've seen anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 people who have actually completed their wilderness permits. And based on our estimated compliance rates, we think most years close to 10,000 people at least attempt to climb Mount Hood. That doesn't mean all of them actually do summit, but that's the number that's always thrown around. It's about 10,000 a year. I just like to explain it because that's not a we don't have perfect science to to arrive at that number, but we do think it's a pretty close estimate.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It is.
Yeah.
And the important thing is that there are days with hundreds or more people, and crowding can be a real safety concern for climbers on a lot of nice days in the spring. So that's the most important concern, is that some days there are many hundred or more climbers in a very small area, and upwards of 1,000 recreating somewhere on the mountain. A lot of people.
I know the Mount Hood National Forest has talked about an issue of inexperienced climbers, of people going up Mount Hood saying, this is not the most technical climb. I can make this happen. What can you tell us about those kinds of issues? I mean, what kind of skill is required to get up to the top of Mount Hood?
Yeah. Mount Hood requires planning, preparation, training, technical gear, and flexibility with your plans, and that's to get up the easiest routes on the mountain. So every route to the summit is a technical climb. Every route involves traveling on or near a glacier and glacial features of some sort nearby, at least something to consider. And there's a lot of hazards that I've mentioned: rock fall, ice fall, just sliding falls on the snow, glacial features like fumarole holes, and glacial features like crevasses and fumarole holes, all kinds of and avalanches, lots of hazards that affect climbers. So to say that a little more concisely, climbers need to prepare, need to inform themselves as best they can to know the risk they're taking on the mountain, and be flexible to come back another day. And if a person is at all unsure or lacking confidence to do a truly technical peak ascent on their own, without on their own, then a guided trip is a great option for people who are relatively new to mountaineering. And Mount Hood is not a good first technical climb for really anyone.
Ryan, how many times have you climbed Mount Hood, and how many different routes have you taken?
That's a good question. I honestly haven't summited Mount Hood that many times. Less than 30 or so. But I've been on the upper mountain, above 10,000 feet lots of times. And often our work as climbing rangers, where we go to around that elevation because we're not comfortable going to a higher elevation solo. We often work solo. So part of that, we spend a ton of time on the mountain, and we don't actually summit all that often because we wait for really ideal conditions to summit. So that's kind of a key point for anyone spending time on the mountain, is that it's an awesome experience regardless of whether you summit or not. And a lot of times it's not the day to summit, but it's still awesome to go to 10,000 feet and have a great time on the mountain.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what is it like up there for those of us who have not summited Mount Hood even one time, let alone 30 times?
Of course, that really depends on the aspect of the mountain. But where most people are thinking, the south side of Mount Hood, the area accessed from timberline and on up to the summit, it's kind of a remarkable terrain feature on a Cascade volcano. It's a relatively low angle and really long slope up from 6,000 feet at timberline to almost 9,500 feet at Triangle Moraine. And it's a relatively non-technical ascent until that point. And then the next 1,000 feet up the mountain to 10,500 feet, the level of technical difficulty increases. 9,500 feet is where most people put their crampons and their helmet on, often start using their ice axe. And then above 10,000 to 10,500 feet, depending on the route variation, the technicality ramps up a whole bunch more. That's where it gets a lot steeper. It's where the greatest exposure to rockfall and icefall is, and the steeper slopes that are easier to fall down. And then that's a relatively short amount of the whole ascent from 10,500 feet to the summit. That's not much over 11,000 feet. So it's a relatively short bit that's really, really technical and challenging. And everything up there from just a little ways above the timberline ski area to the summit is a really special, really amazing view of the mountain itself and of the wide panorama around the mountain. It's a really special place.
My gosh. I think climbing Mount Hood is something that I would like to do eventually. I don't know that Yeah, probably not this year, but maybe next year I'm looking to do it. And I think what's interesting for me is like, I've climbed St. Helens and South Sister, and it's felt just more like a difficult hike more so. And so I think picking up these technical skills is something that's just completely new to me. And so obviously I know you mentioned groups and guides. Are there specific ones that you recommend to pick up these types of skills?
Yeah, I think it depends on the approach. If somebody wants to summit Mount Hood, or climb to a high elevation on Mount Hood with as soon as possible, kind of with the least amount of prep, going on a guided climb is the way to do that. Are the two key guide services on Mount Hood are Timberline Mountain Guides and Cough Adventures. They're both awesome. And then if people have more time to invest in learning the skills, a group like Mazama's, who are actually also an outfitter guide in Forest Service speak, but what they do on the mountain is very different than the guide services. That's a much longer term educational process of how to climb a mountain. Another great way to learn. And then finding, if you're lucky to have a really truly experienced, skilled friend, that's awesome too. But for most people, a guided climb with one of the guide services is a great way to go. And they're very educational, in addition to being a good, relatively safe way to ascend Mount Hood.
If you have someone who comes up to you and, someone who's like, I don't know anything about climbing mountains. I just want to be at the top of Mount Hood. Where do you start someone who's starting from total scratch?
Yeah, my brain usually goes to go climb another mountain first. Vickie, like you mentioned, you've been up a number of other mountains that are less technical, and that's the place to start, regardless of whether you do a guided climb or not. Time on other mountains and getting used to both being up in that alpine environment, and also having the physical conditioning to do a really big push, a really long ascent is crucial. And easing into it is really the way to get to a point of climbing Mount Hood and having it be an enjoyable experience that you can come home safe from. That's really what we're after at the end of the day, is having a good time up there and coming home.
I know that there are definitely people that I saw with St. Helens and South Sister who are attempting to climb in Crocs, or, just like very unprepared for the situation. Do you find that is the case even for Mount Hood?
I haven't seen someone in Crocs yet. But I've only been working on Mount Hood for a couple of years. I'd be curious to ask some of the folks that have been spending time on the mountain for many decades. But we do see an unfortunate number of underprepared climbers, and that can be either underprepared in terms of gear or just underprepared in terms of knowledge and skill. You can have all the right gear, but your brain and your knowledge is still really the most important thing to stay safe on a technical climb like Mount Hood.
Yeah, and what strikes me too is that this is, no matter how much training, how much gear you have, this is still such a wild environment. We were reading the story, I think it was earlier this year, maybe last year, about the climber who fell. She had all the stuff, she had the training, she was experienced, and she still fell, and she survived, thankfully, without any serious injuries. But that really struck me reading that story of even experienced climbers can go up there, something can go wrong. How do you prepare yourself for that kind of present danger?
Yeah. I think the best thing we can do is be patient. The mountain will always wait. We can always come back, at least, in our lifetimes. So the mountain can wait for us to plan, prepare, and train. It can wait for us to be informed and pick favorable conditions, and it can wait for us to turn back when we don't find conditions that are favorable. And that all that put together, if we're just a tiny little bit as patient as the mountain is for us, we can be safe. We can be relatively safe up there.
Wow, these are great life lessons from the mountain. I love this. That's great. Patience is such a good thing to bring into like everyday life. Learning from patient mountainhood. That's wonderful. Any other pieces of wisdom you've picked up from your years of mountain climbing up there?
Oh, probably, but I've also been tired on the mountain too many times, so they're escaping my brain at the moment.
Some things are best left up there, probably.
Yeah.
They're just between you and the summit of Mount Hood.
Yeah, and like you said, that's one of the things that's so special about spending time in these mountains is we can learn a lot. We just have to be open-minded, and that same open-mindedness goes a really long way to having safe experiences over a lifetime in the mountains.
Gosh, I feel like that's a great spot to wrap it up. What a wonderful note to end on, Ryan. Thank you so much for taking the time and for coming on and sharing all about your experiences in Mount Hood. For folks who want any further information or want to learn more about the permits, we've got a story on OregonLive.com, which we'll link in our story here for the podcast. But Ryan, is there any other resources that you want to shout out for folks right now?
Sure. Just for climbers to inform themselves, our website, our Forest Service website, has a number of links. That's a great resource to condition information we provide, and also information from the Northwest Avalanche Center, from the National Weather Service. So check that out. We also try to post condition information on social media. That link is also on our website. It's a government website, so the address is not easy to rattle off, but if you Google climbing Mount Hood, it's pretty easy to find our Forest Service climbing Mount Hood website.
Perfect. Well, Ryan, thanks again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, Vickie, I have to know, you mentioned that Mount Hood is on your list here. How much does this move that idea up your bucket list?
I have a better sense now about what to expect. I think previously I just kept thinking of our past co-host Jim Ryan climbing Mount Hood in one of his videos for the Oregonian and then skiing down, and I was like, nope, I am not capable of doing that. So I think I'm very much inclined to look into some of the groups and the guides and like really kind of immerse myself into learning some proper technique and what is involved in climbing Mount Hood. But I still want to do it, whether it's next year or the year after. I'm going to get to it at some point.
I love that. Patience.
Yep.
I love this lesson. I had a friend who went out with the Mazamas for a long time and trained with them for felt like a year or two before summiting Mount Hood. And it was great to see that patient progress of hers.
Yeah.
It was when I finally saw pictures from when she was up on the mountain, it was like so exciting because I know it was such a long time coming.
Yeah.
So I'm loving this message here of patience. So if you want to get up there and you don't have the time, just take the time, take the time. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Make sure you get up there well and safely.
Maybe I will set this goal now, and I might regret saying this, but next year, like my birthday is in the spring. I'm turning 30. It'd be really cool to climb Mount Hood right around that time.
Okay, I won't hold you to it, but I'm so curious to see how this plays out. Oh gosh.
Man.
Well, that will do it for today, folks. Until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonians YouTube channel and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as HereIsOregon.com.
Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoy the show. And if you want to support this podcast, as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details at OregonLive.com/podsupport. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you are interested in potentially sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@Oregonian.com. This episode of the show is produced by me, Vickie Connor, alongside Jamie Hale.
Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds.